the function of the teacher in the activity of the infinite way is to open the soul center, the spiritual center of the student. That is the main function of the teacher in this work. It is not so much the imparting of words or statements. They play a part. But the part they play is preparatory. The teaching itself is an experience of God, an awakening to God realization to those who have not experienced that, or who may have experienced it occasionally but have not come to the place of continuous realization. It is for this reason that in our classwork we insist on a study of the writings and, where possible, of the recordings, so that the student is already familiar with the principles before we come into class. Then it seems as if when a class begins that the Father gives us a theme or subject which is carried out during the class. It may appear on the first night as one facet of, or one phase of that particular teaching, and the second night as another phase. But when you read or hear the class played back afterward, you'll find that it was one subject touched upon from different angles, and that the point of it was this opening of the spiritual center. You have a case in point in the book Living the Infinite Way. If you will read that book again, and that was originally a class, you will notice that it has a theme. And the theme of that class is God is. And throughout the book, you will find that that is the theme presented, although it is presented from many different angles. Now, while the imparting of that letter of truth is taking place, something much more vital than that is taking place. To begin with, before the class began, I was in prayer or communion with the members of that class. Your natural question may be, how do you know who they are since you never met us before? Well, that is the way it would appear in the outer picture, but actually it isn't so. God has drawn us together long before there is any thought of a class. I am in prayer, meditation, and communion to the end that only those whom God sends shall come to me. Only those whom God sends. Only those prepared for the message. And that those who cannot be receptive and responsive to it be led otherwise to their teacher. So that when we finally come together, it is evident that you have been directed to the message, and I have been directed to deliver it. Now we already meet in oneness. We already meet as friends. We already meet where we're really closer than sisters and brothers, because ours is not a brother and sister relationship merely through birth. Ours is a brother and sister relationship through our sonship in God. God is our Father. You, in coming to this class, whether or not you knew it, you renounced human birth and accepted the fact that God in heaven is your Father. I have done the same thing. And all of us who meet as children of God are spiritual brothers and sisters of one household, of one mind, in one place, with but one purpose. That purpose is the realization, the actual demonstration and experience of God. Now you see, that is the purpose of our classwork. And that is why only those of us should be together who are drawn together in this universal sonship and sisterhood and daughterhood that makes us actually one in God. Now, when we come together in that relationship, we are enabled to demonstrate that which the entire world has sought forever and still seeks but cannot find. We are a community of people who cannot fight with each other, who cannot sue each other, who cannot lust after each other, who cannot fear each other, who cannot lie or cheat or steal or defraud each other. We, if we even thought of attempting it, would find ourselves struck dumb where we stand. We can't do that because we have come together with no armor. We have come together with no weapons of offense or defense, because through prayer we have been led into the consciousness of each other as children of God, children of the one and same Father. Each of us in this room has the same Father, the same creative principle. Now, the world seeks that, but it cannot find it. Last December, I returned to Hawaii from a trip around the world, but a trip that did not include South Africa. And one of the questions the students asked was, what are the chances for world peace? What are the chances now that wars may be ended? And I said to them then, pay no attention to what you read in the newspapers, because they are not giving you the facts. The reason is they don't know them. The danger is not from any of the directions that you are reading about. All of the danger there is now is up in Israel and Egypt and India. There is the potential war spot of the world, and no other place. And why? Because in those places, the age-old religious hatreds are more intense now than they have ever been. And that makes them fertile soil for someone to come in and make trouble. And you see, that's exactly what has evolved in just these 12 months. Israel, Arab world, and the Hindu world is exactly where the entire peace world is centering its attention, because it knows that from that direction can come the conflicts in the world. And what makes this? Well, of course, the Hebrew and the Arab could hardly claim to have the same father. They could hardly claim to be brothers and sisters. And the Arab and the Hindu is in the same position. They are age-old enemies And nothing could be further from their belief than that they have a common parentage. Now then, as long as that exists, there cannot be peace. It makes a difference how many documents are signed, and it makes no difference on which side the most ammunition may be. There cannot be peace between a people who cannot come together in love, and no people can come together in love except they belong to the same family, because there will always be differences of interests where there are differences in vital things like families. Only in the family body can there be a uniting, an actual oneness of interest, oneness of love, oneness of sharing. Everybody within a family shares with each other, and they love it. But only is it that way to the fullest extent in a family. And so you see, it is necessary, in order that spiritual peace be prevalent, that there be but one family of men on the earth. Just one family. And that God be the father of that family. As a matter of fact, God be the father and the mother, the creative principle of that family, and that we all be one in Christ Jesus, that no longer shall there be Jew or Gentile, Greek or bond, slave or free, no longer, but one in truth, one in the spirit of family life. Now, if our students could learn all of the words in all of our books, but failed to have their spiritual center open, they would find that they are eating husks. They would find that they are living on shadows. And shadows are not very substantial for food. It is necessary that our students learn the meaning of these terms. My peace. Not the peace that the world giveth. My peace. Our students must know the difference between my peace and the peace that the world can give. Our students must understand the meaning of I have meat, ye know not of. And remember that that meat had nothing whatsoever to do with a butcher shop. Our students must understand what the Master meant when he said, I can give you water, living waters, waters that if you drink you will never thirst again. And he was not talking about the water down there in the well. Our students must know the meaning of I am the bread of life, and understand that we're not talking about baker's bread. We must know the meaning of wine, spiritual wine of inspiration. Then, you see, we have access to a hidden language, a language with a hidden meaning, an esoteric meaning, a transcendental meaning, a spiritual meaning. Words that do not mean what the dictionary says, but what spiritual saints and spiritual seers have said. And so it is that as we come together, we share in meat, wine, water, bread. But it's the type of food that the world knoweth not of, and therefore it cannot partake of that food. This is the mystical bread, the mystical wine, the mystical water, the mystical meat. It is that, yes, it is the pearl of great price. It is the pearl for which we should be willing to give everything that we have in order to receive, and yet it cannot be bought for money. It cannot be bought for money any more than our classwork can be bought for money. No amount of money buys its way into a class. The price of our classwork is union, communion, oneness, a desire to experience God. And that is why a class is always a sacred experience. It never leaves us where it finds us, because God brought us together for the experience. You didn't design this closed classwork, nor did I. It was given to me of God. It was given to me, it was shown to me how it was to be conducted, who was to be in it, and who wasn't, and yet there are no rules, except the rules that we must give evidence of our desire to know God and to be willing to make some effort in the direction of finding this pearl that truly is without price. Now, in our classwork, healings very often take place. Physical healings, mental, moral, sometimes financial. But that isn't the important thing. The important thing is that there be a transformation of consciousness in the class, which may tonight or next week or next year result in healing. You see, healing, actually spiritual healing, is the giving up of material consciousness for spiritual consciousness. And just as material consciousness has externalized itself as a sick body or a sick pocketbook, so the attunement or attainment of spiritual consciousness externalizes itself as a spiritual body or a spiritual purse, spiritual health, or spiritual supply. So you see that you cannot separate a transformation of consciousness from healing, because the transformation of consciousness is that which appears outwardly as healing. Now sometimes for one reason or another, someone catches a glimpse of the spiritual light or spiritual truth that results in a very quick healing of any nature. At other times, this work is like the planting of a seed. We have the three different types of soil in which spiritual seed may be planted. We are told that there is rocky soil and barren soil and fertile soil. Now, as far as the teacher is concerned, there is only one type of seed, and that is spiritual seed. So that, from the standpoint of truth or the teacher or teaching, everyone in a class should receive the same benefit, because it is the same truth and the same seed and coming out of the same prepared consciousness. But the reason that can never be is that in some measure we are addressing rocky soil, barren soil, and different degrees of fertile soil. So that the rocky soil probably receives nothing at all. Well, it is very rare for rocky soil to get into this classwork, because there are things that tend to keep them out before they get in. The barren soil, there may be some here and there who have not yet caught a glimpse of the spiritual universe, but they have been working toward it, thinking about it, studying toward it, and so may be ready for their barren soil to become fertile. And that may happen in class. But for those who have some measure of fertile soil, this seed takes root. Whether or not it brings an instantaneous healing, or in other matters, whether it takes 6 months or a year, is just the fact that the seed in consciousness must develop and bring about a change of consciousness. And as soon as that change has come, then the healing is evident. And all of this is traceable back to the planting of the seed during the class. Now, if you sow to the flesh, you reap corruption. If you sow to the Spirit, you reap life everlasting. All right? There is where our degree of rocky soil, barren soil, or fertile soil comes in. The sowing to the flesh is really not meant by Paul as it is understood in most churches. Sowing to the flesh has very little to do with immorality or sexuality or anything along that line. Paul didn't have that in mind at all when he spoke of sowing to the flesh. Sowing to the flesh means a material state of consciousness that is placing its faith or confidence or hope in the world of effect. In other words, a person who believes that money is supply is sowing to the flesh. Or a person who believes that health is physical, that it has something to do with hearts and lungs and stomachs and bodies, they are sowing to the flesh. Their hope is in the body being well, or the pocketbook being full. The person who gains their companionship solely from men and women and children are sowing to the flesh. Anyone who derives their principal joys from the external world, whether it's theater or movies or dances or games, they are sowing to the flesh. Sowing to the Spirit means placing one's hope, faith, and reliance on the invisible, in understanding that supply is invisible substance, companionship is invisible substance, health is invisible substance, that nobody in the world has ever seen health or supply or companionship, because these are spiritual qualities within our consciousness. The very moment one recognizes this and recognizes that the real issues of life are within, they have begun to sow to the Spirit. Now, of course, this does not mean that we become ascetics. It doesn't mean that we don't enjoy theater or music or books or baseball games. Oh, no. It doesn't mean that. It means that they are merely incidental to our lives. They are just pastimes in our experience. They are just the added things of a cultured existence. But they are not the major things of life. The major things of life consist of our inner life. That life that is lived within ourselves. For instance, when the Master goes to a mountaintop for 40 days, that's when he is really living. When he comes down to the plains to heal the multitudes, that's just the added thing that God has given for his earthly experience and ours. When we commune with the Father within, in our homes, in our bedrooms, in our dens or libraries or gardens, wherever we may find a quiet spot, that is when we are living our real lives. Then when we go out in the world and act as husbands or wives or children or neighbors or brothers, that is when we are carrying the essence of our real life out into the world to share with men and women. You see that if a teacher came to this platform as a man with something to say, you might gain some knowledge from him, but you wouldn't gain the real things of life. You wouldn't gain your spiritual joy, your spiritual intuition, your contact with God, your health, and your supply. That you couldn't get from someone who came to the platform merely to say something and to tell you something or teach you something. No. A teacher on the spiritual path must live most of his life in aloneness, in quietness, in inner communion with God, in prayer. Then when that teacher comes out into the world to be with the students, that teacher brings the essence of God to the student's consciousness. The words that he speaks or she speaks helps, but it isn't it. You will find, if God's grace sends me in this direction very much, you will find that the days will come when we will meet for a class and not one word will be spoken. We will just sit here in meditation, in quietness, for an hour, a half hour, an hour and a half, and then go home. And you won't think it's strange. You won't wonder at that at all. It'll be much more natural than if I were to speak on those occasions. As a matter of fact, if I should speak on those occasions, you'd probably say, why didn't he keep quiet today? Now, in the same way, we have had classes where we have come together and inside of 15 or 20 minutes I have said, let's go home. We all went home. And we have had other classes when it seemed as if somebody was going to have to send out for the breakfast table. It just didn't want to come to an end. We have had classes in some cities where we started in at 8 o'clock in the morning and didn't finish till midnight. We just had a class in my room and then a class at breakfast and a class at lunch and then off to a truth center and back again and ended up with midnight coffee in the restaurant. And everybody's still there. Well, that is the way the Spirit operates when we are united, not just for the sake of finding some truth, but actually finding conscious communion with truth within ourselves. And so you see that as our students go out from a class, they also have a very solemn obligation, because there is no way in which they can go out from this class and tell others what they learned, because if they go to voice it, they'll find that the right words are not on their lips. But if they have caught the essence of this class, they will be enabled to say something in their own words, something they may not have heard in class, something that may not have been said in class, yet which was transferred from the Father within to their consciousness, and they can impart that either in word or in spirit or in healing. That is the obligation of our students. You see, in this class you are learning that God is the only power, and so that when a person speaks to you of their sins or their diseases or their lacks, you do not get into any emotional state about wanting to help them or wishing you knew enough to heal them. You immediately revert to the truth that you have absorbed, namely, how can you help in a thing that isn't a reality? How can you heal someone when there is no disease? How can you enrich someone when there is no lack? Because, you see, by now you have learned that what you behold in the three-dimensional world, that means what you behold through seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling, is not the truth, does not bear witness to the truth, and no matter how good it is still no relationship to truth. You have learned in this class that spiritual vision alone understands and knows that the individual before you is God's own being, God's own selfhood made manifest, God's own life expressed, God's own intelligence made evident, the very soul of God individualized as you, as me, as your patient, as your student. We acknowledge that sense testimony does not bear witness to that. We acknowledge that if I look at you through my eyes, I may see human men and women, good and bad, sick and well, rich and poor. And if you look up here at me through your eyes, the most you can see is a human being, even though you might go so far as to say, well, he has a good intention anyhow. But when I look out and disregard what my eyes see, there is a still small voice within me that says, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Now remember, appearances do not indicate that. No. Appearances do not indicate that even when people are beautiful or handsome or physically perfect. Even then, sense testimony won't show them forth as spiritual. It takes that spiritual vision that enabled Peter to reply to the Master's question, whom do ye say that I am? And his reply, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And the Master rightly said to him, flesh and blood did not tell you this. In other words, what you saw with your eyes or heard with your ears, that isn't what convinced you. It was the Father within you that revealed to you my true identity. In other words, it was the spiritual discernment within you that enabled you to know who I am. And that is who I am. And that is who you are. The Christ, the Son of God, the very living witness of God's presence on earth. That's who I am. That's who you are. But spiritual discernment alone can reveal that. Only the inner grace of God would enable you to go into a prison and mingle with men sentenced for all kinds of crime, and yet have the divine grace to look around and say, thou art the Christ. Not out loud. They might think you're a little bit foolish. But to yourself, look every one of those men and women in the eyes and realize thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Not yet aware of your true identity, but it is your true identity, and then the miracle takes place. And friends, I'm speaking from experience of 3 years in prison work. I can tell you the miracles that happen as you silently and secretly realize Christ sitting behind the eyes of every individual. As you develop the faculty, not of looking at your patients' or students' bodies, but looking behind their eyes. Don't look at their eyes either, you might fall in love with them. But look behind the eyes, and there you will see a spiritual soul gazing out at you. That's the Christ of their being, which they themselves do not know is there. And you know what miracle takes place? They don't know what you've done, but they know you've done it, because they become attracted to you. They want to come to you. They want to hear what you have to say. They want to know what you have to impart, and that is where your healings take place. In hospitals, in prisons, in mental institutes, not by virtue of anything you say to a patient, not by virtue of any truth that you tell them, because it isn't even wise to tell truth to sick people, not until they're well enough to have felt the effects of it so they can believe you. Then in teaching you can impart to them. But otherwise, what you do in secret. If you do it in secret, you will watch the effect in the open. May I read to you from the 6th chapter of Matthew. Take heed that ye do not your alms before men to be seen of them. Otherwise ye have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet. When thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret. And thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. But when ye pray, use not vain repetitions, as the heathen do, for they think that they shall be heard for their much speaking. Be not ye therefore like unto them, for your Father knoweth what things ye have need of before ye ask. Now, you will all have friends and relatives and patients and students who will wish to benefit by your experience in class. They will say to you, you're reading those books, you're spending hours with them, you're listening to tapes for hours, and then you go to class beside. Well, what for? What do you get out of it? What's in it for you? Or for us in your family? And they have a right to an answer, because you have no right to spend your time in much reading and much studying and much praying without being able to be a light of the world unto those still in darkness. And so, do not ever, from the moment you leave here, do not ever say no to a request for help. Do not ever say, oh, why don't you see my practitioner? Or why don't you go to my teacher? You accept the responsibility when you are asked for help, because in the last analysis, you're not being called upon to heal by your understanding, nor are you going to be called on to heal by your spiritual power. So don't believe that you haven't enough understanding, and don't believe that you haven't enough spiritual power, because none of us have. I have never yet met anyone who had enough understanding to heal anything, or enough spiritual power to heal anything. Only God has the power to remove the mist from our eyes. Only God has the power to dispel the illusions of sense. And God is no respecter of persons, and so God will appear through your consciousness as soon as you accept the responsibility. But do it in secret. Don't talk about being a healer. Don't speak of it to anyone. Don't tell anyone. Don't advertise it. Wait until someone comes to you and asks, and then you can say to yourself, thank you, Father, that the work was done before they reached here. You sent them here so that you could appear to them through my consciousness. Do you see that? When you go out looking for patients and students, you've got a hard job to do something for them because it's you who have to do it. But if you abide secretly in the center of your being and someone comes to you for help, then you can say, thank you, Father, you did the work before they got here and before I can even think a right thought. Do you follow that? You see how that operates? That if God sent you to me, that God must have put your fulfillment in my mouth. Do you see that? Whereas if I sent for you, the responsibility is up to me to be able to satisfy you. But I don't have to satisfy you. I didn't send for you. I don't have to heal for you. I don't have to teach you. I didn't send for you. God brought us together so that God could function in the midst of us. And so it is. When the Father sends someone to you for healing or teaching, be assured of this, that the Father's wisdom and the Father's love will be there before the appointment to take care of the situation. And as the Master told his disciples, don't take thought for what you shall say. God will put the words in your mouth when you get there. And so it is. Whether you are healing or whether you are teaching, you need only meditate to stay in the Spirit. Then when your patients or students are brought to you, the Father places the right words or thoughts within you, and the correct Spirit flows, and the work takes place. Do you see that? This is all an activity of God. It's not an activity of man. We stand foursquare with Peter and John as they stand before the temple beautiful and say, why marvel ye, men of Israel, as if we through our own wisdom or our own power had done this thing. It was the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob who hath performed this healing, and the same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead will quicken also your mortal body. Do you see that? But the point is this. There must always be a you or a me. There must always be a Moses or a Jesus or a John or a Paul. There must always be Christ made manifest as Jesus, or Christ made manifest as John, or Christ made manifest as Mary or Bill. There must always be a you or a me to be the light unto those not yet awakened to their true identity. But we who have taken or have received this robe of the Master, this healing consciousness, we must be obedient in maintaining it in silence, in secrecy, and in sacredness. That is why in our message of the infinite way, none of us have any titles, and none of us have any robes. And the reason is that we must be saints inside, but just men and women out. Because otherwise we lose our value to the world. They think we're something set aside, or somebody set aside with special powers or special privileges, and we must not appear that way to men because we aren't. We are businessmen or we are housewives who, through a devotion to God, have received some measure of light but a measure of light that is available to anybody on the face of the globe who is willing to turn to that same source and be faithful until the answer comes, until the gift comes, until the message comes, until instructions come showing us how to fulfill ourselves. Secrecy is necessary. Silence is necessary, because those are the two things that are embodied in sacredness. Anything that we hold sacred, we hold secret. Anything that we hold sacred, we hold in the silence. Anything else we may make a public display of. Anything else we may show off about. But that which we consider to be sacred to us, we hold very secret and very sacred and very silent. And so it is, this Christ of God, this spiritual sonship, is our secret. We don't tell it to the world, but we preach the gospel to those who have been led to us to receive it. We do not go out to change the world from its way, but we do impart it to those who themselves want to be changed from the way they are. And so it is. This that you know in secrecy, in silence, in sacredness, builds up into a tremendous power, which you just waste if you talk it. You just waste if you throw it around hither and yon, more especially if you spout it to those who do not wish to receive it. It is as if you hit up against a wall and it bounced back at you and gave you a good headache. No, save the pearl of wisdom for those who can rightly value it. Remember this, the truth about God, Christ, the Son of God, that truth is the great pearl. It has been called the great pearl by the Master. It has been known as the great pearl throughout all ages. And who would take out a wonderful pearl to show to someone who isn't a connoisseur of gems? It would just be a waste, wouldn't it? And so it is with this. We do not take out our pearls to show to the man in the street. Yes, when we find someone in distress, we may voice something, or we may give them a pamphlet or a booklet or a book, but then we stop there until they themselves make the overtures to seeking something higher. Do you see that? This work may return to you a great prosperity. Not only it will return a great spiritual prosperity, but it may result in even economic prosperity. But that isn't what you come to it for. You come to it as seeking the light and with a desire to share the light. And therefore, you need not seek an audience. You need not seek a public. You need not seek a practice or a student body. You need only fulfill yourself with the Spirit of God, the Word of God, and then the Father which seeth in secret sendeth those to us openly who are ready for our message. Now, it is for this reason that when someone asks you for help, do not give them metaphysical cliches. Do not turn around and just say, oh, it isn't true, or oh, there's no disease in God, or don't make those statements which, while spiritually true, aren't really true on the human level. Don't do it, because you may arouse a greater antagonism in your patient than a helpful attitude. I speak from experience again. I have very often asked friends for help and then had them say, oh, Joe, you know it isn't real. And then I got good and mad and said, if you knew it, I'd have the answer already. And it's true, you see. If we know this spiritual truth, we don't have to voice it or speak it to convince you of it. The inner silent knowing is enough. Now, when we are asked for help, it is legitimate to say, certainly, I'll give it to you immediately. I'll be with you at once, or I'll take up work for you, or I'll go into prayer or communion for you. That is fine, and that is right, and that is original. But further than that, it isn't necessary to go until there is a response, and they come and say, well, I'm feeling the benefit of that, I'm healed, or I'm better. Could you explain this or that? Yes, indeed. And then, of course, once you've reached that point, the teaching, the outer teaching, may begin. People who are in pain, people who are suffering incurable diseases, people who are so much engaged in their outer condition, do not attempt to teach them orally until you have brought some measure of healing to them. In other words, until their own consciousness is awakened to a desire to hear the word, let them have it silently, inaudibly. Let them have it in secrecy and in silence. Then when they respond, they will be able to bear the word that you give them. You know that humans, as a rule, are not able to bear the truth. It is a strange thing that we resist more truth than we accept. The human mind doesn't want to be annihilated. And your spiritual truth is going to annihilate it. They are going to die daily until they have only that mind which was in Christ Jesus. And the human part of us knows that if we let you at us with enough spiritual truth, you'll wipe out our humanhood. And as humans, we don't like it. Some of us like baseball games too much to give them up, and some like radios and television, and others like novels, and others like dancing, and they just are not ready to have those things taken from them. And spiritual realization is going to take most of these things of the world away from them, even the good things of the world. Be surprised as this spiritual light reaches individual consciousness, how the bridge games go out the window, and the golf goes out the window, and a lot of these social activities go out the window. And if you were to say that to a person in advance, they would say, well, why should I give that up? What's wrong about them? And you have no answer, because humanly there's nothing wrong about them. Not a thing. It's only spiritually that they are an infringement. It's only that spiritually they are a hindrance to our spiritual development. It's only spiritually that they no longer appeal to us. Do you see? And so you first have need to develop the spirituality and let take place what may. And as I've said, it arouses the antagonism if a person's in pain to have someone to say to them, well, you know, there's no pain really. Well, you know pain isn't real. It doesn't hurt. Well, maybe it doesn't hurt you, but it does me. And so we have found it very practical when a person is in difficulty to consciously say to them, let me help you, or I will help you, or let me take that up in the work, or I'll take it up at once and call back later, or let me hear from you tomorrow. Let them know that your heart and soul and your spiritual understanding is at their service, but then do not try to convert them all of a sudden while they're in pain, or instruct them. It doesn't always do. Well, now comes time for a meditation, because none of these words are power until they have taken root in consciousness and sprung forth into life.